Verna Holt was 63 years old, on her knees on someone else's bathroom floor, when her phone buzzed against the tile, and she let it ring through to voicemail because Mrs. Averill didn't pay her to answer calls. The bleach hit her first, sharp and chemical, under the sweeter rot of the grout she was working at with an old toothbrush, and beneath that, faint, the wet dog smell of a bath mat that needed replacing years ago. The tile had gone cold enough to numb her knees through her jeans a good hour back. Somewhere down the hall, a television murmured a game show nobody was watching. She didn't look up. A cleaning woman who looks up, she'd learned a long time ago, is a cleaning woman who gets noticed, and noticed usually meant one more thing added on for the same $80. At her collar, under the fabric where it had lived for going on 20 years, a small brass key swung loose on its shoestring and tapped once against the porcelain tub. She caught it before it could scratch anything, the way she always did, without thinking much about what it opened. She'd mostly stopped wondering. Otis had pressed it into her palm back when she was 43, and he was already sick the first time, told her to keep it somewhere safe, and she had, for 2 decades now, the way a person keeps a photograph long after they've forgotten the story that goes with it. She still owed Ridgeview Hospice $1,842 for the last 6 weeks of Otis's life, a debt that wasn't legally hers and that Dwight had never once offered to touch, and she put $11 against it every Friday, whether she had it or not. This week, she didn't. Not really. This week, she had $612 to stretch across 11 days, and rent on the trailer lot was due in 9 of them. Dwight would be at the steakhouse tonight. She knew it the way a person knows weather is coming without checking. He'd mentioned it at the funeral, some retirement dinner for a man from the Rotary Club, and she could already picture him ordering the ribeye. Without glancing at the price, the way he ordered everything, while she'd be driving home tonight, watching the gas gauge instead of the road, she rinsed the toothbrush and moved to the next line of grout. Nobody, she thought, scrubbing harder than the tile required, is owed a soft landing just because they got there first. Her phone buzzed a second time. Same unfamiliar number, patient in the particular way only lawyers and hospitals ever seemed to manage. She sat back on her heels, wiped her hand on her jeans, and answered it against her better judgment. The voice asked if she was Verna Holt, and whether she was related to the late Otis Fentress, and could she be at the office of Callum and Reyes at 10 o'clock Thursday morning regarding the reading of his will. She stayed, sitting on the cold tile a moment longer than the call required. The phone warm against her ear, the key resting against her collarbone, like it had something to say, and had been waiting a long time to say it. What, after everything, could a dead man's lawyer possibly still want with her? The office of Callum and Reyes smelled of coffee and old paper, and held the particular hush of a room built to make ordinary people feel slightly on trial. Verna sat in a leather chair that squeaked when she shifted, hands folded over a purse holding $40 and a grocery list. Across from her, Dwight Fentress sat with one ankle crossed over his knee, and she noticed, because a person can't always help noticing, that his hiking boots still had the store crease across the toe, the laces stiff as wire, the box for them, she'd have bet money, still sitting in the bed of his truck outside. Paulette sat beside him in sunglasses she hadn't bothered removing indoors, thumb already moving across her phone. The attorney, a careful, tired man named Reyes, read the preliminaries in a voice built for exactly this kind of morning. To his son, Dwight Fentress, Otis left Fentress Hardware and Salvage in full, the building, the inventory, the delivery truck, and an operating account holding $62,000 on top of a store the will noted was appraised at $310,000. Dwight didn't quite smile. He did something worse with his mouth, a kind of settling, like a man lowering himself into a bath he'd been promised his whole life. To his niece, Verna Holt, Reyes continued. Otis left the cabin. 4 acres at Sparrow Hollow. Tax parcel 1488. Structure assessed at $7. Land assessed at $600. For reasons she would come to understand, he slid a small tin box across the desk. It was lighter than she'd expected, the metal cool under her fingers, a bloom of rust spreading across one corner like a stain that had given up trying to be scrubbed out. Inside, when she opened it, was a folded deed and a note in Otis's handwriting. The letters shaking the way his hands had shaken those last months. "When you're ready." Oh, Dwight laughed. It wasn't loud, which was somehow worse. An almost gentle laugh, almost affectionate, the laugh of a man who believed he was being generous with his amusement. $7, he said, shaking his head at Paulette like she alone would appreciate it. Don't spend it all in one place, Verna. Paulette didn't look up from her phone, but she smiled at the screen as though it had said something clever. Verna didn't answer. She had learned, over 63 years and especially the last 6, that silence cost her nothing and gave men like Dwight nothing to work with either. She closed the tin box over the deed and folded her hands back in her lap while Dwight and Paulette began, quietly, congratulating each other across her, already discussing whether to sell the store's back lot to the tire place next door. She was still holding the tin box an hour later, alone in her car, when she read the note again. For the hearth, when you're ready. The only hearth that could mean was the one at Sparrow Hollow, cold now for longer than she wanted to guess, and she found herself picturing it, the mantel, the black iron doors, the smell of wood smoke from a Christmas 30 years gone, before she'd made any decision at all. She started the car and pointed it toward the hollow before she'd fully decided to go. The gravel on Cold Iron Gap Road gave out 2 miles before the hollow did, and after that it was just the ruts Otis's old truck had cut decades back, grown over with a grass hump down the center that brushed the underside of her car like something trying to hold her back. She'd taken the day off from the Averill place to make the drive, which meant $96 she wouldn't see this month, and she'd filled the tank the whole way up. $28 she'd budgeted for groceries, because she didn't trust the gauge, or her own nerve, to get her back down if either one ran short. She smelled the cabin before she saw it. Wet ash gone cold years ago, and under that, the mineral chill of stone that hadn't held heat in longer than that, and threaded through both unmistakably, pine going soft with rot. Wind moved through the hemlocks in one long unbroken note, and somewhere a length of gutter had worked loose and knocked against the eave in a rhythm with no pattern to it at all. The afternoon had turned strange and cold for June, dropping into the 40s by the time she cut the engine, her breath showing in the air. The porch boards gave under her weight, soft and damp through the soles of her shoes, the railing gone to a rust that came off orange on her palm when she caught it. Only then did she let herself look at the place straight on. The roofline sagging where a hemlock limb had come down across the back corner, black plastic sheeting someone, maybe Otis himself, had nailed over a hole years back and never finished, a window boarded over, animal scat where a welcome mat used to be. It was worse, far worse than the cabin in her memory, and for a moment she stood with one hand on the car door, engine still ticking as it cooled, seriously weighing whether to get back in and drive the 2 hours home to a trailer that at least didn't smell like something had died behind the walls. But she thought of Otis at 90, thin as a fence post, gripping her wrist from the hospice bed and saying, "You'll go up there when I'm gone, promise me." And she'd promised without asking why, the way a person promises a dying man almost anything. She remembered this same porch strung with Christmas lights that only half worked, cider steaming in tin cups, Otis laughing so hard at something he'd nearly gone off the step backward. That cabin and this one were not the same place, except that they were. Underneath, she stayed hunting for kindling dry enough to burn. She knelt at the hearth and noticed it without quite meaning to. The field stones of the chimney breast were laid in 2 different mortars. Most of it was old, grey, crumbling, soft at the edges. 40 years of wood smoke worked into every seam. But one section, low and to the left of the firebox, was darker, tighter, the joint far cleaner than anything around it. It hadn't had 40 years to catch soot. It hadn't had anywhere close. She knelt there a long moment with the fire poker in hand, not sure yet what she was looking at, only that the patch didn't belong to the rest of the chimney's history. She rapped it once. The way a person knocks on a door more from habit than expectation, the sound came back wrong. Not the dead thud of solid stone packed against solid earth, but something with air behind it. A short hollow note, close, like knuckles on the back of a cabinet. She knocked the stone beside it. Solid. Back to that one section, no bigger than a shoebox, and it answered hollow again, and a third time, in case her ears had been lying to her the first 2. She found the seam with her fingers before she found it with her eyes. A hairline gap in the mortar where a thumbnail could just catch, tracing the outline of a single fieldstone, set slightly proud of its neighbors, as if whoever mortared it back in hadn't cared to match the reveal exactly. Behind the stove, out of the light, she wouldn't have found it in 100 years of only looking. She'd found it because, for once, she'd stopped to listen. Nothing about opening it was easy. She went out to the car for a tire iron and found a rusted cold chisel hanging on a nail in the lean-to, and she knelt at that hearth the better part of an hour, working the chisel into the seam a fraction of an inch at a time, striking it with a fist-sized rock, because she hadn't thought to bring a hammer, her knuckles catching stone twice hard enough to draw blood. The old mortar didn't want to give. It had been mixed to last, and it had lasted, and every inch she won by force, sweat cutting tracks through the dust on her face, despite the cold, her shoulders burning in a way she'd feel for 3 days after. When the stone finally shifted, all at once, the way stubborn things always seem to break, it swung inward on a hinge so old and dried it didn't so much creak as sigh. A smell rolled out ahead of everything else, canvas gone stiff with age, and beneath it, faint, machine oil, and beneath that, the flat mineral smell of a space that had never once in its life let in weather. Cold air followed the smell, a draft that had been sealed in that cavity since before she was born. She reached in before her eyes had adjusted to the dark of it, and her fingers found canvas first, a sack, stiff, heavier than its size had any business being, dragging at her wrist as she worked it toward the firebox light. Under the canvas, when she finally got it open with fingers that had stopped being steady several minutes back, her flashlight caught a low, dull gleam. Nothing showy about it, a gold that didn't flicker the way tin or brass would have. Bars, small ones, no bigger than her palm, stacked 4 deep, each stamped faintly with a star and a set of digits too worn to read anymore. Behind them, a cigar box gone soft at the corners, packed edge to edge, with coins dulled by decades in the dark. Behind that, a chamois pouch, its drawstring rotted to nothing, that spilled a handful of raw stone into her palm when she lifted it. Rough, unpolished, the color of a bruise just starting to heal, more of them than she could count without setting the flashlight down. She didn't understand the size of it right away. Nobody does. She sat back on the cold hearth, with a gold bar in one hand and a fistful of raw sapphires in the other, which was count, 10 bars. She counted them twice to be sure which was count. She counted them, a cigar box she didn't dare guess the weight of without a scale, a pouch of stone she had no way to price sitting on a stranger's, no, her own, chimney floor in the dark. It took nearly 20 minutes, sitting there with her own blood drying on her knuckles, before the number, taking shape in her head, stopped feeling like someone else's number, and started slowly to feel like hers. She told no one for 6 days, not because she was hiding it, but because she genuinely didn't know who to tell first. A lawyer, a bank, the county, and she kept driving up to Sparrow Hollow every afternoon after the Averill place, half convinced she'd find the stone sealed shut again, and the whole thing proven to be something she'd dreamed up out of exhaustion. Dwight found out because he came up to gloat. He told himself, and told her, that it was to check the property line. The store's insurance agent wanted fresh photos of the whole parcel, he said, though nobody had asked for photos of a ruined 4-acre hollow in living memory. Verna knew the truth of it, watching him pick his way up the porch steps in boots that finally had some dirt worked into them. He'd come to stand in the wreck of what he considered his father's poor judgment and enjoy it a while. He didn't enjoy it. He found the chisel first, still lying on the hearth where she'd left it. Then the broken stone propped open against the firebox because she hadn't worked out yet how to close it properly. Then on the mantel, because it hadn't occurred to her to hide it, the tin box with 2 coins she'd pulled out to show the bank. He didn't say much. Verna, watching from the doorway with an armful of firewood, saw something move behind his face that she recognized from 30 years of watching him. Not surprise, exactly, but a fast, ugly recalculation, the look of a man discovering he'd been outbid on something he hadn't known was for sale. "This isn't finished," he said, and left without taking anything, which frightened her a good deal more than if he had. The certified letter came 4 days later. Dwight, through an attorney she'd never heard of, had filed a motion to reopen the estate, alleging undue influence, that Verna, in Otis's final and most vulnerable year, had isolated him from his son and manipulated a dying man's judgment for personal gain. The motion asked the court to freeze the Sparrow Hollow parcel and everything on it, pending a hearing, effective immediately. She read it, standing at her own kitchen counter, the trailer's fluorescent light humming overhead, and felt something in her chest go very still and very cold, colder than the hollow had ever managed to make her. 6 days. She had owned it, truly owned it, for 6 days. Her hand went to the key at her collar out of old habit. It didn't feel like an answer this time. It felt like a question the county might decide it no longer had to let her ask. 2 days before the hearing, sitting in her attorney's office going over what little paperwork she had, Verna mentioned, almost as an aside, that she still had a small fireproof box of Otis's she'd never managed to open, something she'd packed out of his hospice room 2 years back and kept in her closet since, on the assumption it was empty or simply not hers to force. Her attorney, a patient, unhurried woman named Marsh, asked if she still had it. Verna said yes. Marsh asked gently if she'd ever tried the key she wore. She hadn't. It had never once occurred to her that the two might belong to each other. That night, at her own kitchen table, she set the box down and lifted the shoestring over her head for the first time in 20 years. The key turned on the first try, no resistance at all. The only lock in this entire ordeal that had ever opened easy. Inside was a folded stack of papers, and Otis's old to-read yet, and Otis's old phone, screen black, battery long dead. She charged it overnight without much hope. In the morning, it woke exactly where he'd left it, and in the video folder dated 4 months before he died was a 9-minute recording she watched alone at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold beside her. He'd propped the phone against a water pitcher. He named the date nape near Dwight's, hers, stated plainly that he was of sound mind and that no one had pressured him into a single word of what he was about to say. He spoke about Dwight first, kindly but without illusions, a good son who'd built a good life somewhere else, and never once, not a single time, made the drive to sit with him. Then he spoke about Verna, the $11 a week he'd somehow found out about anyway, the drives to dialysis, the nights spent in a recliner instead of a bed of her own. "I'm leaving her the hollow," he said, steadier than she remembered him sounding by then, "because there's something up there worth more than the store. And she's the only one who ever sat still long enough. With me, to have earned the sitting still it'll take to find it." She brought the phone to Marsh's office the next morning. Dwight and Paulette were already in the hallway when she arrived, Dwight thumbing open and shut a wireless earbud case still shrink-wrapped in one corner, a habit he probably didn't know he had. "You understand this isn't personal," he said, falling into step beside her. "Dad wasn't himself those last months. Anybody could see that. You were just there. Convenient." $7 doesn't sound quite so funny anymore, does it?" Werner said, and kept walking. Marsh played the recording for all of them in a small conference room. No theatrics. The phone propped against a stack of files the way Otis propped it against a water pitcher. Nobody spoke while it ran. Paulette took her sunglasses off somewhere around the second minute, and Dwight went very still through the part about the store, and stiller still through the part about the recliner. "We'll be filing this with the court in the morning," Marsh said when it ended. "I'd expect your motion won't survive contact with it." It didn't. The contest was withdrawn 11 days later, quietly, through the same attorney's office that had filed it, with no further comment offered. The appraiser from Asheville spent 4 hours at Sparrow Hollow with a loop and a small digital scale and left looking more rattled than Werner felt. The gold alone came to just under $900,000 at melt value, before anyone accounted for what the coins might bring from a collector. Sapphires. The sapphire, rough and unheated, you would need a specialist to price properly. But the low estimate the appraiser gave her, standing on the porch, turning his hat in his hands, like he was at a funeral, started with a comma she wasn't used to seeing in numbers meant for her. She didn't quit the Averill place right away. She told herself it was because Mrs. Averill was 78 and particular about who touched her good china. But the truth, when she let herself look at it straight on, was that she wasn't ready yet to be a person with nowhere she had to be on a Tuesday morning. She gave the work up eventually, on her own schedule, months later, and only after training the woman who'd take over her route. She paid off the trailer lot. She paid Ridgeview. Hospice, the balance the estate should have covered years before, though the woman on the phone told her, gently, that she hadn't owed a cent of it to begin with. Werner said she knew that. She paid it anyway. She had the roof fixed first, then the porch, then, last of all, the chimney, though she left that one stone loose on its hinge, resettable without mortar, because a thing like that, once you know it's there, is hard to seal back up for good. She learned later, piecing it together from county records, and an old-timer at the feed store who remembered Otis Young, that he'd worked a small sapphire claim in that hollow back in the early 60s, before it played out, and had never much trusted a bank, since the one his own father used had folded without warning when Otis was a boy. He'd rather have had something he could hold in his hand than a number on a piece of paper telling him what it was worth. Some winters now she drives up just to sit by that hearth with a fire going, the same wind moving through the same hemlocks, and she doesn't need there to be anything hidden there anymore to feel like Otis is still in the room with her. She never brought up Dwight's line about the $7 again after that hallway. She didn't need to. Cold Iron Gap is a small enough place that a story like this one tells itself, and tells itself accurately, without any help from her. At her collar, some mornings, her hand still finds the key out of habit, though there's nothing left anywhere for it to open. She keeps it there anyway. Not everything a person carries is meant to unlock something. Some of it is just there to remind you that you were the one trusted to carry it at all. If Werner's patience feels familiar, you hit subscribe. There's another story like hers waiting every day, and down in the comments tell us, Has your own family ever counted you out too soon? We read every word.